It's a story getting a lot of attention today, but perhaps not bearing down on the issue at heart, the First Amendment. Protests erupt after hearing for Mahmoud Khalil took place today. He's a Palestinian with a green card who played a key role in anti-Israel protests at Columbia University, and he was arrested over the weekend. The Trump administration wants him out of the country, saying he is siding with terrorists and therefore a threat. His attorneys say he's being punished for, quote, exercising free speech. For now, he'll remain in ICE custody, and this all brings me to today's big three. You remember the chaos.
1, 2, 3, 4. Deportation no more. Deportation no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 7, 8. Israel is a racist state.
Protests at college campuses last fall reignited this week here in New York at Columbia University, those arguing against Israel's policies against Gaza. Now, Mahmoud Khalil is somebody who organized many of those protests as a grad student and a green card holder. He's a permanent resident. He's married to an American citizen. And that means that many, including those on the far left, like squad members Rashida Tlaib, have said he has a constitutional right to free speech.
If you believe in constitutional rights, you understand that they're targeting this person, and everyone knows he has been very vocal against the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And they're targeting him and refusing him constitutional rights. Who's next?
But not only has he held protests where he seemingly sides not just with Palestinians, but with Hamas, he has openly called for the end of Western civilization. Still, when do we go too far? What is protected by the First Amendment? As a reminder, this is how it reads. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. Join me now to debate this issue, which I think deserves hearing from both sides, is human rights attorney Brooke Goldstein and journalist and constitutional lawyer Glenn Greenwald. Thank you both. Glenn, I'd love to start with you. I find you, and for that matter, our relationship interesting because in the past, I might have agreed with you vociferously. Recently, more agreement. I'm not sure where I stand here today, Glenn, but I know you look at this and you think many on the right have all of a sudden abandoned their defense of free speech.
Oh, there's no question that they have. I mean, this is what happens when you're actually a principled free speech advocate instead of one who only objects to censorship when it's your political allies who are being targeted, which is that a lot of people say they believe in free speech, except when it comes to the ideas they most hate, which they want silenced. I just want to make one crucial point, which is you had said people on the far left, like Rashida Tlaib, believe that legal residents in the United States have the right of free speech. That is an indisputable proposition that the Supreme Court has for 200 years affirmed. And just imagine if that weren't the case. It would mean that if, say, like Jordan Peterson, who's not an American citizen but is always in the United States, were to go and denounce the Biden White House, the Biden White House could arrest him and deport him, and nobody could object on constitutional grounds because he's a foreigner. Of course, people legally in the United States have the right of free speech, and we don't want to create any kind of a framework, especially on college campuses, as the American right has been saying, where because of the argument that minority groups are endangered by certain views, black people or trans people or whatever, we have to censor those views in order to create a safe environment. And that's exactly what so many American conservatives out of great loyalty to Israel are now doing.
I appreciate you saying that and correcting me on the longstanding policy on the United States First Amendment. I also would say, in correction of myself, it's not just the far left and Rashida Tlaib. It is, as you said, principal individuals, including those on the right, that would bring up the First Amendment. However, I will now go to you, Brooke. This man was also a green card holder. That is conditional according to immigration policy. Now, what are the conditions where you can revoke someone's green card?
Right. Well, thank you, Will, for having me. I have to say at the outset that the debate about free speech here is irrelevant because Mahmoud Khalil was not detained and he's not being threatened with deportation because of his speech. He was detained because of his conduct. He's not someone who was just standing there holding a sign that said, "I love Hamas and kill all the Jews." This is someone who is accused of engaging in a criminal conspiracy and organizing mass civil rights violations, mass trespass, assaults, destruction of property, hostile takeovers of private property and campuses. This is conduct. And so when you have conduct that's indefensible, of course, people are going to, come and start crying free speech, free speech. But Glenn is smart enough to know that this is not a speech case. There are actions here. And it's because of those actions that he is being detained. And hopefully he will be deported because he has absolutely no right to be in this country and violate the provisions of his green card, which specifically say that you cannot engage in criminal activity that endangers the public safety. And that is the activity he's engaged in. Now, he does have a due process right because, this is a democracy. We're not a dictatorship. We don't just round people up on the street and throw them out, right? He has a due process right now to challenge his detention, and the government will have to prove, they will have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that he engaged in conduct that violated his green card. So this free speech debate is a decoy, and Glenn knows that.
Glenn?
The way criminality works in the United States is that you have to be charged with a crime and then convicted of one. Not only hasn't he ever been convicted of any crime, he's never even been charged with a crime. If he had been engaged in all this criminality and assaulting people and burning things that is being claimed, why hasn't the Trump Justice Department or the New York Police Department, which arrested hundreds of Columbia students in connection with these protests, why didn't they arrest him and charge him with these crimes? Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State who revoked his green card, said that the argument for revoking it is not that he committed crimes. It is that his political opinion and political activism is a danger because it does not align with American foreign policy. You have had all kinds of conservatives and Trump supporters throughout the campaign promising to come in and take all sorts of actions against people who are critics of Israel or protesting against Israel. There's obviously a huge political speech component to this case, and the solution for somebody legally in the United States who's accused of committing a crime is not to come on cable news and say, oh, they did all these crimes. It's to charge them with crimes. Right. He's not charged with any crime. He just had his visa revoked based on no process whatsoever. That's not the evidence
required under the Immigration and Nationality Act. The government has to prove by clear and convincing evidence, not that he committed a crime, but that he engaged and was convicted for it, but that he engaged in criminal activity. That is exactly what's going to happen. There's going to be a proceeding where the burden of proof is on the government now to prove that he can be deported for violating the law. And believe me, if all they have is speech, the government's not going to win. This is not a free speech debate.
And really quick, Brooke, what would be the burden of proof?
Engaged in a
what is the burden of proof to prove that he did
and
what?
Convincing evidence to prove that he engaged in actions that violated the civil rights of other Americans, that he organized and was part of a conspiracy to take over, to trespass, to destroy public property, to prevent Jewish students from entering into campus, and so on and so forth.
Short of clear and convincing evidence.
With their own eyes what happened at Columbia University. We're not stupid.
We
can see that it was beyond speech. These criminal encampments were not just speech. They were action, they were activity, and we have absolutely every right to get people out of the country who are endangering the public safety and national security of our country.
Brooke. I hear you.
Can you imagine the opposite?
Okay, Brooke.
Can you imagine if we weren't allowed to deport him, what this country would look like?
I hear you. I hear the clear and convincing evidence, short of a criminal conviction, that can show that you are, I believe, the standard of national security of the United States. Glenn, I hope you're unmuted. Your dogs joined the conversation for a short bit, and I appreciate their contribution. I'm going to put this last thing to you, Glenn, and it's worthy of a deeper conversation. I do worry that at some point the First Amendment, which, Glenn, I would consider myself a principled proponent of the First Amendment, and I hear, Brooke, that that's a red herring. It's not a part of this conversation. I hear you, Brooke. But I do worry that it's not a suicide pact. And we can't follow the path of Europe in having people who don't believe in the foundational elements of Western civilization and calling for the end of Western civilization, then being protected by the exact foundations of Western civilization.
No, but Will, you're advocating the European model. In Europe, ideas are banned and you can go to jail for them, and people do, if you say things that the state concludes is a threat to the national order, to national security. J.D. Vance just went to Germany and cited them for having that. We don't have that tradition in the United States. We have a tradition of free speech where you're even allowed to advocate overthrow of the U.S. government, and that's how the country was founded. And the Supreme Court has repeatedly said you're even allowed to do that, and therefore, of course, you're allowed to even criticize the sacred nation of Israel.
I hear you. And by the way, you're right. What that says to me in the end is we have to be much more serious about vetting people that come into this country and being more serious about our immigration policies, because once they do, they are availed of some very serious rights here in the United States. Hey, this is a great conversation. I appreciated it, hearing both sides. I truly do. And I'm glad for this to be a venue to have this conversation. Brooke, Glenn, and Glenn's dogs, thank you for being on the Will Cain Show.